Hello. Yeah, about the palette. So if we just start doing some shape and we select some neutral base color, let's say for your stones, let's take some medium brown gray color. Let's also put this here as a reference to our palette. If you go into the shadows here, if you go darker and you go more saturated, then it will look a bit like what you have right now. It's more contrast and a bit more extreme. But basically what you want to do, and let's choose a bit more saturated base color so it looks a bit more interesting. So if we go into the shadows, we go darker here. Let's go also colder. And by colder, I mean if you look at this bar here, cold colors are all the colors that go toward blue. So if we want to move toward blue from red, we should go into violet. That's basically the closest way to blue is through violet. If we go this way, we go through the warm colors. Like red and orange is already warm. If we want to cool that down, we go into the red areas. And you can see right now it looks very extreme. So let's go a bit desaturated and darker. This will be our darkest shadow. Like this. Let's also place this here as a palette. And if I go into the lighter shades and into the highlights of the stone, I do the same, but in the opposite direction, like into the warmer colors, into yellow. And let's also make this brighter. And now we have a finished potato. What I want to do is to just put some tones in between. And to do that, I usually just select the highlight color. I do something like 100 opacity, or you can also do the center, but sometimes it looks too strong. But we can go with this for now. We just paint this here, so we basically have our in-between tone. Like this. Okay, and we also can do the same for the darker tone. Just select it like this, and then quickly paint it that way. And like this, we have established a quick palette that looks a bit more interesting. Why is this not centered? Okay. We have established a quick palette, and now I can just come in here and fix some things up, add some anti-aliasing like this. And yeah, like this we have made it a bit more interesting than just using plain colors. What I would usually do now is to add one more highlight color, kind of like the last highlight color. I go much more into the extreme now, and I also make it much smaller than the highlight before, like this. And like this we can add the effect of some glossiness. But it also depends on the material. On a rock you maybe don't need it. Now it looks a bit weird. And just like this, we could also turn down the opacity and do some basically blending here. But it's not always better if you blend it. And sometimes you want to have this really, really strong highlight. You can always go brighter and brighter, but I would just recommend not always going too extreme into the highlights. Otherwise it can get a very glossy feeling overall. And also you should think about the values in your overall composition. For example, if you have a stone that will be very important, then you can maybe make it a bit brighter. And I like to save some of the strongest highlight colors for the really important things. Like if you basically, without using HDR, you only have a certain part of the value range. So if you think about the value range from black to white, that is basically or 0 to 255. This is the full value range. And if every object always uses the full value range, it starts to look uninteresting or too busy. the overall composition will be very uninteresting because everything will be using the full range. So you won't be able to easily put certain things into focus. If you look at very good artworks, usually the value range for most of the stuff can be either low key or high key. So everything is very bright or everything is very dark. And the things that get a lot of attention then pop out by using either very dark, a very dark part of the value range or a very light part of the value range. So this is something to keep in mind if you build your palette, that you eventually don't want to use like all the colors for one thing. Just keep some of this value range back and use it when you need it, and don't always use it. Otherwise you will just waste this range. So right now we don't have used the full value range. We're somewhere in the middle. We could make it up to white and we could go down to black. But for like a simple rock, we don't need that. What you could do, but this is very specific, you could add a rim light. And usually if you add some rim light or some contrast light, you want to use the more or less complementary colors. So if we use a reddish color here or a brownish color, we could go with blue, and we could choose a color like this. So keep it in the same range somehow, in the same value range. To start off, make it a little bit brighter. And let's just try this here to make it a bit more interesting. We go in. And like this, we can make the overall object a bit more interesting. So like this, we established our palette. We have the contrast color here that we can use. And we could also go darker if we like, for example. We could then use this additional color for darker and lighter stones. I can do it quickly. Let's just see if OBS hasn't crashed yet. Perfect. We could go in here and use it to give some contrast against the rim light, like this. This looks really stupid. Let's just make it like this. Bit better. And you can also use this these shades to add detail. For example, I can just use this shade here, or here, and this can add some more detail to the stone. If we, for example, use this here, then you can see it looks like some small crack. So you don't always need to use a very strong contrast. Sometimes you can use those colors to add very subtle details like these. And now it looks like a crack that goes across the whole rock. And you can see it here. All right, so what's important to know here is that you make use of your palette and make use of your contrast range, basically. If I use this black here, of course I can make like a crack, but it looks like it doesn't belong there. So if I quickly expand the canvas a bit like this, if I, for example, build another rock here, and those two rocks maybe form a wall later, if I use this as my base color, like a darker color, and this is my base color now, so I have less contrast range. This is my basically main highlight, what I use here over there. So if I go in now and make this overall darker, I basically can use the same palette, but I will have a different result from the overall look of the thing. So let's just use this here. 2 potatoes. 2 potatoes in the night. What a wonderful piece. Okay. So now let's add this as our smallest highlight. And you can see it's the same palette, but this rock looks a bit darker. And if I now also go in and use the other color range to add more detail, So some smaller dents in the stone, like this. And now I will add another stone that is lighter in overall color. And like this I can really make use of this palette that we use. And also not everything needs the same amount of detail. For example, this rock down here could maybe work with really a little amount of detail because I don't want it to be so much in focus. Maybe it's more like a background element. And also I don't add the blue color here, maybe just like a little highlight dip in the very edge. So for this rock down here, this will already be enough. And now let's make an overall brighter rock. Like this. And maybe this as the darkest shadow. It's not that much brighter actually. Let's go one step higher. Like this. And then use this for the very deep shadows and the crevices here. Like this. So what I really want to do is to use the range that I have and not waste it. Because, for example, I can use this color here that I used here as one of the bigger colors. I can use it here for anti-aliasing. So I don't want to waste that space. After all, it doesn't really look that much different. Anyway, maybe I will make another smaller rock. Or just increase the size of this highlight. Okay, now we're talking. So the size of your highlights also sets the overall color theme for this object. And now I will make a pretty big highlight. So you can see all these look like they have a different overall brightness, even if they use the same palette. And now again, I just add some detail. And that's it. So you can always add more colors to your palette if you need them, but I would always recommend staying inside your palette as long as you can, so you don't just add stuff because you can, basically. And yeah, that's it. I hope it helped a bit. And the same rules about the cold and warm. Basically, you know your color wheel, hopefully. Otherwise, you can find a ton of information about warm and cold colors on the internet. And the same principles apply for most colors. For me personally, I always see green as a very neutral color. Let's do some green apple here, or something like a green apple. Some green something. Something like this. So if we go into the highlights, I can make a quick example of why it's so important. So let's do the same 2 times. Man, can't be so hard. Let's go even a bit bigger. Okay, so let's have these 2 apples. And let's quickly give them colors. So let's just go dark and bright on the left one, like most people would do without thinking too much. Oh, and by the way, I also try to not use too saturated colors because playing with saturation gives you another range that you can play with, basically. If you always saturate every color like so, then you won't be able to use elements in your scene that you can further saturate because everything is saturated. Some people like that look and some games use that look, but I'm personally not a big fan of oversaturated colors. Let's make this apple overall a bit more saturated so I can show you like what I mean. This is really crazy greens, so like this. Let's put a highlight in and a stronger highlight. And like one very final highlight like this. And another shadow. Like this. And a little rim light here, just to make it a bit more interesting. So maybe it's an apple, maybe it's just some green oddball, whatever. But this is the basic palette. Now let's go here. Let's choose the same base color, but a bit more desaturated, so I have more range to play with. And now if I go into the shadows, if I go darker, but I also go colder a little bit. Not very much, but a little bit is usually enough. Why is this shortcut not working? Am I insane? Ah. Why isn't it working? Am I blind? Oh. Using the wrong tool. Okay, all right. So I have this base color here. I go a bit darker, I go a bit colder. Let's add this shadow here. Like this. And now I also go one more time darker. Let's go again a bit more darker, a bit more desaturated, and a bit cooler. Like this. And for the highlights, I go a bit brighter and I go a bit warmer. And I also go a bit more saturated, so more to the right. So, like this. And now more brighter, more saturated, like this. And for the final tone, like this. And now you can see if I compare these two, they're both not perfect. Both palettes could be improved, but you can see that this looks much more alive than this. This is pretty flat from the colors. It's a bit boring, at least if you ask me. Everyone has a different taste, but for me personally, I would prefer this one. It's just a bit more interesting, a bit more alive than the other one. Yeah, and that's it. Just a quick demonstration about how to make stuff interesting or more interesting. Bye.